They make it look effortless in the movies, arrows whispering through the air like rain, quivers emptied and somehow refilled as if by magic. You watch and believe the illusion. Infinite ammunition, a relentless curtain of flight that never frays. But close your eyes for a moment and imagine the smell instead. Wet leather, iron, mud, and the copper tang of blood. Hear the rasp of a bowstring, the grunt of a man who has already drawn 20, 30 arrows this hour. Feel the weight of a sheaf on your hip, not endless, not divine, but wood and feather, and the fragile hope of survival. The real story is not spectacle, it is logistics. It is the slow, grinding economy of death. Listen, this isn't theatre. At Ardres in 1351, English archers repelled charge after charge until their last shafts flew. Then silence. Then chaos. Light-armed men, masters of distance, were suddenly hunted at close quarters. They had not failed in skill. They had simply run out of metal and feather. One river bend, one exhausted quiver, and a well-woven defence became a slaughter. That single failure tells you everything. Wars are fought not just with courage, but with supply lines, with the unseen hands that stitch together an army's capacity to endure. So how did England bend the world to feed its archers? How did a pre-industrial kingdom muster millions of goose feathers, knotless shafts, hardened nocks and steel heads, to forge a storm of 500,000 arrows at Crecy, as some reckon? Think of the Tower of London not as a museum of princes, but as a factory and a vault. Think of a new royal office created by Henry V, appointing a keeper of the King's Arrows, Nicholas Minot, whose job was less romantic than it sounds, to order, count and hoard. Juliet Barker's chronicles whisper of budgets and clerks. Robert Hardy's studies drag you into the technical obsession of rate of fire and the brutal math of supply. Picture the countryside, villages humming with fletchers and bowyers, geese plucked in the chill before dawn, shafts dried and straightened in smoke and sun, sheriffs collected sheaves, clerks tallied barrels, carts rolled toward Bristol, to Calais, to the waiting wagons behind the lines. And on campaign, a company of archers did not stand alone. It moved with a small vital industry, their own wagon, a Fletcher mending splintered shafts, women and boys ferrying fresh bundles from the rear. The choreography was mundane and sacred at once. It turned individual craftsmen into the silent backbone of victory. Now feel the shift. The archer at the front, breath fogging in cold air, counting the remaining sheaves, measuring his cadence against the drumbeat of supply. He watches boys run, small fleet shadows between mud and spear, bearing bundles like fragile lifelines. He knows that skill will only carry him so far. The rest depends on others, clerks, keepers, farmers, those who pluck the feathers and forge the points. War is they told the archers, they were the finger of God, that their arrows were judgment carried on the wind. But God in England was a bureaucracy. The act of killing at Agincourt began 2 years earlier, in the cold administrative silence of ledger books. Henry V did not leave the fate of his kingdom to chance or valour. He smothered chaos in preparation. He outlawed the selling of weapons to enemies. He created an office, staffed it, funded it, and set it to work like a furnace without rest. Nicolas Minot, the keeper of the King's Arrows, became priest of a cult of supply. Thousands of orders, shipments, inspections, each one a prayer pressed into parchment. 12,000 arrows from a London Fletcher here, 50 bundles from a provincial town there. Across fields and forests, England inhaled feathers and exhaled death. Do not think arrows were simple. They were not straw and whimsy. They were anatomy. A spine of clean wood, a horned nock as delicate as a newborn's fingernail, fletching of goose feather, and a steel head shaped to a purpose. Bodkin for armour, broadhead for flesh. Each component required its own chain of labour. Steel was heated, hammered, hardened. Shafts were aged, shaved, sanded. Feathers were cut, split, bound. Thousands of geese gave their wings to war. Entire counties became organs of production. Bridgewater, Taunton, Sherborne, villages whose names survive not for heroes, but for craftsmen who whispered death into bundles of 24. Picture the sheriffs, not as petty officials, but as generals of invisible armies. When the king demanded arrows, they answered by conscripting skill itself. Fletchers and bowyers worked through season and storm. The counties delivered sheaves as if they were paying taxes in blood. The sheriffs handed them to local lords. The lords pushed them toward hubs, Bristol, London, where clerks counted and repacked them into barrels. Those barrels rolled on wagons into ships across the Channel. From 1347 onward, Calais became a larder of war. England's lifeblood rested in its warehouses, compact storms waiting for a moment to be unleashed. And when armies marched, the baggage train followed like a shadow, one wagon per company of archers, groaning with bundles. Bowyers repaired limbs, fletchers replaced feathers. Some nights men did not sleep. They sat by firelight, making the weapon that would save the man beside them. War is never won at the front line. It is won in the quiet places where preparation devours time, money, and sanity. The longbow looked like freedom, but it was only effective because England chained itself to its logistics. The real terror of the longbow was not its range, nor its speed, nor even the shriek of arrows overhead. It was the certainty. When English archers loosed their first volleys, they did so knowing there were more behind them, waiting in wagons, in barrels, in shipholds, in storehouses built by kings who understood the cold arithmetic of war. Look at the battle through the eyes of a French knight at Crécy or Poitiers. You advance, shield raised, armour gleaming with the pride of your rank. You hear the first strike, metal upon plate, the flat, ugly slap of bodkin against mail. You think it manageable. A nuisance, and then the sky darkens again, and again, and again. Not a moment of reprieve. You do not fight men. You fight a machine designed to smother you. At the front, archers rotated like clockwork. They stood in ranks so that no moment was wasted. When a man's quiver emptied, he did not linger. He ran back, trading places with a comrade who stepped forward as naturally as drawing breath. Behind them, women knelt beside the wagons, fingers numb in the wind, sorting bundles by type and quality. Boys sprinted through the lines with arms full of sheaves, shouting counts as they went. 6 left, 4 left, so the archers could adjust their tempo. Rate of fire was not a skill, it was rationing. A veteran did not draw faster just because he could. He drew faster only when the chain behind him could sustain it. And if the battle stretched into dusk, another economy emerged. After blood soaked the ground and silence swallowed the field, they hunted for arrows. They combed through corpses, hands shaking, plucking shafts from mud and armour, measuring which could be saved. Reuse was cheaper than creation, but not easier. Repair took time, patience, and 10 workers in London once spent 6 days refitting 7,000 recovered projectiles, rebuilding the storm, one feather at a time. Longbow warfare was recycling turned into ritual. England nearly bled itself dry to keep that ritual alive. In one campaign in 1359, counties sent 850,000 arrows to the Tower of London, on top of earlier shipments, on top of thousands delivered directly to ports and troops. Merchants complained there were none left to sell. Sheriffs pleaded shortage. One official, in Chester, was told plainly, "No arrows can be obtained from England, because the king has taken for his use all that can be found anywhere there." Imagine a nation stripped clean, not of horses or gold, but of feathers. This is the truth filmmakers never show you. Every shaft that pierced mail on a muddy field had behind it 1,000 hands, a dozen decisions, a month of labour. Battles were not sudden miracles of heroism. They were industrial nightmares without machines. And when Henry V finally marched to Agincourt in 1415, he did not march as a warrior. He marched as the architect of an ecosystem of destruction. His archers did not win because they were brave. They won because they were supplied. They found the French at Agincourt not in triumph, but in mud, thick, sucking, merciless mud that clung to boots like punishment. The battlefield itself became a weapon. Narrow, hemmed in by forests, slick with rain, it crushed cavalry into a funnel. The knights advanced, a glittering mass of arrogance, spurred by pride and disbelief. They were armoured men of lineage and honour, born to lead, bred to dominate. They believed history favoured bloodlines, not arrows. They were wrong. Henry's archers planted their stakes, sharp, angled, teeth of wood, meant to break a charge before it began. Then the storm began, not graceful, not cinematic. The sound was like wet cloth tearing in the sky, followed by the crack of impact on armour, the groan of men absorbing blows they never expected. Arrows pinned visors, pierced pits between plates, drove through joints, exploited seams. Horses screamed. Riders fell. Each man hit became a barrier for the one behind him. Knights drowned in bodies, they choked in the sludge, claws of steel trapping them in their own armour. English archers, light-footed, danced forward to finish the work with mallets and knives. The bow was distance, the dagger was mercy, but do not mistake Agincourt for chaos. It was order, cold, premeditated order. The victory was not born on the field, it was born in the Tower of London, in the labour of Fletchers, in the plucked feathers of thousands of geese, in the hands of nameless boys sprinting bundles to the front. Soldiers bleed on the battlefield, but nations bleed long before the battle begins. England had bled in warehouses, in workshops, in barns turned into impromptu armories. It had sacrificed comfort, commerce, and even dignity to feed a machine of war that created death not by heroism, but by repetition. Stand at the edge of that field at sunset. You would not see men. You would see a country poured into the earth. Barrels, sheaves, wagons, camp followers, clerks, sheriffs, smiths, all turned into corpses and feathers and mud. This was Henry's true genius. Not a sword, but a system. He understood what so many kings never did. Battles are not decided by courage. Courage evaporates in minutes. Battles are decided by supply, and supply is decided years in advance. Every arrow that fell at Agincourt was a signature of bureaucracy, a seal of preparation, a quiet warning to anyone who thought honour could withstand industry. Do not be deceived by the romance of cinema. The longbow was not magic. It was a weapon of economy. It devoured nations to feed its hunger. It transformed peasants into executioners and clerks into warlords of the ledger. And in its shadow, men with titles and banners discovered something humbling. Nobility meant nothing when a feathered shaft could slip between plates and tip the world. In the end, the longbow was not the instrument of English victory. The supply chain was. It armed every hand, sustained every volley, and turned every battlefield into an industrialized graveyard. That is the hidden truth of medieval war. The deadliest weapon is not the bow nor the sword. It is the ability to never run out of arrows.